everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about a very important concept in photography, and that's the exposure triangle. It's a three-part thing, triangle. It's made up of shutter speed, your f-stop or your aperture, and ISO. Shutter speed is the length of time that your shutter is open. And so we can have a very, very short shutter speed that lets in a tiny bit of light, or we can have a really, really long shutter speed that lets in a lot of light. With your shutter speed, short shutter speed, little light, long shutter speed, lots of light. You can adjust that in very, very small increments based on what you need for that. Next up, we've got aperture. Your aperture is how big or small the opening is going into your camera. The smaller the number, the wider the aperture, because it's a ratio, okay? So if you have f4, that means the aperture is 1/4 the size of the focal length. So if your focal length is 50 mil, then your aperture at f4 would be 12.5 mil in size. Same thing with shutter speed. If we have a very, very small aperture, or if we have a very large f-stop, then we're going to let in just a tiny bit of light. The bigger your aperture opening, or the smaller the f number, the more sand you're going to get, or the more light you're going to get hitting your sensor. Right? So f-stop, small f-stop, meaning a large number, then a very small ratio, then little light. Lots of light comes in when you've got a small aperture. Last up, ISO. ISO is the sensitivity of your sensor to light. So if your ISO is really small, say ISO 100, then ISO 100 is going to let in just a little bit of light, or expose for just a little bit of light. The bigger you make your ISO, the more sensitive to light, so the more light it's going to capture as you increase the size of your ISO. ISO does come with a trade-off though. The bigger your ISO, or the more sensitive it is to light, the more noise you're going to get in your image. Adjusting these three elements in the exposure triangle is how we get a perfect exposure. We can take, for our exposure, we can take sand from any of these glasses and we can pour them into other glasses. So, for example, if I want a faster shutter speed and I have this much light to play with, then I can take my shutter speed and I can increase the size of my aperture, and I can also turn up my ISO. Now my shutter speed is faster, but I have the same amount of light giving me a perfect exposure, or keeping a perfect exposure. If I don't want noise, then I have to take the ISO and I have to spread it out. And I can put it in shutter speed, I can put it in aperture, and I can have a very, very low ISO, and I still have a perfect exposure. Overexposure comes in when we have more light than we are dealing with. For example, let's give ourselves a lot more light. So we got a lot more light. Aperture, if I want to get a smaller aperture, which is going to give me a deeper depth of field, then I need to put that somewhere, and I can put it in ISO and I can put it in shutter speed. Okay, if I make this smaller, less light gets to the sensor, so I need to let more light in somewhere. So if I use my shutter speed and I let more light in somewhere and it overflows, then I'm overexposed. My shutter speed just can't do it. Going the other way, same thing. If I put a little bit of shutter speed here and I fill this up, then it's not gonna work because I want to keep my perfect exposure. The exposure triangle is a matter of trying to find the perfect balance of these three elements: shutter speed, aperture, ISO, to get your perfect exposure. This is where filters come in. Filters stop light before it ever hits the sensor. Some light, a lot of light, depends on what size filter you have. You can have 3-stop, 6-stop, 10-stop. Those are kind of the standards. If you have your circular polarizer, that too is going to block a little bit of light. So putting a filter in front of your lens, in front of your sensor, is going to block light, and you'll be able to maintain your balance in your exposure triangle. Earlier, when I had too much shutter speed, that's because I didn't want my shutter speed to go that fast. I wanted, for example, in the previous video with the waterfalls at Kitty Kitty Falls, I wanted to not stop the water, I wanted to blur the water, so I needed to put something in front of it to slow it down. So that's what filters do. They help block the light so that you can maintain your balance here. I hope this has been a good explainer on the exposure triangle, and I hope you can put it into practice. I'm at Piha Beach, and I'm gonna go put it into practice. If this has been helpful to you, if you've helped you clear up some understanding, give it a thumbs up. If you would like to support me further, there is Patreon below, and I also have a store on my website. If you would like to purchase an image, please do so. If you've seen an image here or on Instagram that you would like to purchase, let me know. Send an email to photos@jameselam.com, and I will make sure that it gets put in the store. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.